Join me today for another Sunday kitchen restock as I prepare for the week ahead. As always in my meal prep videos, my focus is more so on prepping components versus individual meals. That way we can pull from these staples and create meals really quickly throughout the week. However, this week I did want to prep some breakfast burritos, and these are such a great meal prep option. They're something that you can make a large batch of and freeze, or if you want to, you can just keep them in the fridge to reheat for quick breakfast throughout the week. I did decide this week to make homemade tortillas for the breakfast burritos, but you could definitely just use store-bought. Tortillas are pretty easy to make. So I have some flour in a bowl and I'm just adding in a little bit of salt and some baking powder and getting that all mixed together. For the fat in these tortillas, I'm using butter today, but I would typically use lard just because we've got lots of it, and mixing that into the flour until you've got kind of a crumbly mixture. Stirring in some hot water, and then I'm going to knead this for about 5 minutes until I've got a soft, pliable dough that's a little bit tacky, but you don't want it to be too sticky. Now you can make whatever size tortillas you want. Because I'm doing the burritos, I am doing some burrito sized tortillas, and I am portioning this dough into 6 even portions. I like to form those into discs and then just cover with a damp dish towel, and those are going to rest for about half an hour to an hour, and then they'll be ready to cook up. I've got a skillet heating over medium, and I'm just flouring my surface lightly, and I'm gonna roll out the tortilla dough. The hardest part about making tortillas is just getting them thin enough, because you do want them to be super thin as they're going to puff up a little bit as they cook. So once I've got that rolled out, I like to transfer it just on my rolling pin into the hot skillet. I've got a little bit of fat in there, and these cook up really quickly. So over medium heat, you're only going to cook them about 30 seconds per side, and you'll see bubbles form. They're going to start to brown on the other underside, and then they're ready to flip. As each tortilla is done, I just like to transfer that into a dish towel to keep them warm, soft, and pliable for when we're assembling the breakfast burritos. For fillings, of course, you can do whatever you like. I know some people like to add in roasted potatoes, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of veggies in these that I can saute first to have in the scramble. And I'm just doing some yellow onion and some pepper from the garden. For some extra protein, I also am going to be adding in some of our pork breakfast sausage from the pigs that we raised last year. So I am just chopping that up, and that's going to go into a hot skillet with a little bit of butter. Once that sausage is partially cooked through, I'm adding in my veggies so those can soften a little bit, and prepping the eggs. So I'm doing about 2 eggs per breakfast burrito. You can obviously do more, but I'm gonna have quite a bit of sausage in there that is going to bulk up this mixture. And I don't add any milk or anything to the eggs, but I am adding a little bit of Calabrian chili paste. Before assembling the breakfast burritos, I like to do this right on a sheet of parchment paper so I can wrap them up as I go and then transfer them into a container. So I'm just taking one of my tortillas, filling it up with some of that egg mixture, and adding on some cheese as well. Roll those up, wrap them in that sheet of parchment, and then once these are cool, they're ready to transfer into the fridge. They're good for about 5 days in there, or you can store them in the freezer. This week I also prepped a loaf of seeded gluten-free bread. This is a new gluten-free bread recipe to me and one that I will definitely be making again. It turned out really, really well. So I am just adding to a bowl a little bit of sugar, the yeast, and some warm water to allow that to proof while I get started on the rest of the mixture. Now, gluten-free baking works a little bit differently, and because you are using flours that do not contain gluten, you kind of need to replace that if you want to get a similar texture. So the easiest way to do that is by using psyllium husk. I find that that gives any bread recipe a good kind of stretch the way that gluten would. So that gets mixed into some water and that gets set aside for a few minutes and it's going to gel up. Most gluten-free bread recipes use a mix of flours to give you the best texture. So for this recipe, I'm using millet flour as well as sorghum flour and some tapioca starch. Adding some salt to those dry ingredients and getting that mixed together. Then in another bowl, I misjudged the size of bowl that I needed to use, so I just transferred those wet ingredients into a larger bowl. So I've got that yeast mixture as well as the psyllium husk mixture, and I'm adding in a little bit of apple cider vinegar to that. And then that gets mixed together. I start out with the wooden spoon and then move over to using my hands. Now for the seeds to make this a seeded bread, I am using some whole flax seed. That's also going to add some fiber, and I'm going to use sunflower seeds today as well as some pumpkin seeds, but you could really change this up based on what you have on hand or what you prefer. I loved how this combination turned out, and this is definitely what I will continue to do going forward. So some of that seed mixture gets mixed right into the dough, and then the rest is going to be reserved to top it off with. That gets shaped and transferred to a loaf pan, and I'm going to cover that and let that sit aside to rise. Once that loaf has risen, I'm topping it off with the rest of the seeds that I had set aside earlier, and this is ready to bake. I do have a pan of hot water in the bottom of the oven as well. For a snack option this week, I'm prepping a hybrid chia pudding and overnight oat recipe. I love this. It makes a great breakfast or snack option. I'm doing a little bit smaller portions, so I'm intending for this to be a snack. And what I love about this is it's super filling and there is a lot of fiber in this recipe. So I start out with some oats, and I am doing some whole chia seeds as well as some ground flax seeds to up the fiber. I like to do a mix of Greek yogurt and milk. The Greek yogurt's going to help increase the protein. Now, typically I would sweeten this with a little bit of maple syrup, but I have lots of home canned apple butter that I'm trying to work through, so I decided to use some of that today as well. Stir that all together, and then I portion this out. Again, my intention is for this to be a snack this week, so I did a little bit smaller portions, but you could make this into larger portions if you wanted it to be a meal instead. Now, typically when I prep something like this, I wouldn't top it with any fruit, but we have a bunch of Honeycrisp apples. I am on a Honeycrisp apple kick. They're my favorite fruit. And so I wanted to saute some in just a little bit of coconut oil with some cinnamon to top these off with. These turned out so delicious, the perfect fall snack, and an option that is filled with a ton of fiber. No meal prep would be complete for me without prepping some sort of protein. I would argue it's the most important thing that I meal prep, because if I don't have a meal planned, it is just so convenient to be able to grab that and put together a full, complete meal really quickly. So of course, I'm cooking a whole chicken from frozen in the Instant Pot. Super easy to do. I do 10 minutes per pound and allow it to do a natural release. We were also ready to restock on some homemade mayonnaise. If you haven't made this before, it is super easy to do and way more affordable than some of the cleaner mayonnaise options at the store. I like to use avocado oil. It has a really mild flavor, but you could also use light olive oil. I'm making a very basic mayonnaise today, but you could flavor it here. So you could add in fresh garlic or chipotle peppers. I'm just doing a plain version, so none of that today. I am adding a little bit of vinegar. I like to do apple cider vinegar, but again, this is super versatile. You could do lemon juice or a combination of the two, white wine vinegar, white vinegar. Honestly, whatever you have will work. And I like to do a little bit of Dijon mustard. Add in a whole egg, and I like to use an immersion blender for this. It is the most forgiving. If you've ever made homemade mayonnaise and had it separate, you were probably doing it either in a blender or a food processor. If you're doing it that way, you just need to make sure that you're adding in the oil really, really slowly. By doing it in a jar with the immersion blender like this, You can just get it all done in one go, and I've never had it fail. I'm not doing a whole lot of veggie prep today, but I did want to clean up some carrots to have in the fridge as snacks. I've been pulling lots out of the garden, and I've sorted my carrots so that I'm using the little ones first because they won't last quite as long as the larger ones, and that is going to be a quick snack option, something that we can have with lunches, ready to go throughout the week. This gluten-free bread turned out so well. This is definitely going to be a recipe that's on repeat for us, and this was such a nice addition to our meal prep. I loved having this with some soup on some cooler days this week. There are many reasons why I love to cook a whole chicken in the Instant Pot. One being that it's really convenient. You don't even need to thaw the chicken, but the meat just falls off the bones really, really easily. So it makes it really easy to shred and have a protein ready to go in the fridge. Of course, those bones just go straight back into the Instant Pot, and I top that off with some water. Oftentimes I'll leave this plain, but I did add in a little bit of veggies to this as well. I like to cook the broth for 4 hours on high pressure, and oftentimes if I'm doing this at night before bed, I'll just turn on the warm function, and then I can strain it off in the morning, and we have broth to use all throughout the week. Thank you for joining me this week for a little kitchen restock and meal prep, and I will see you in the next video.